The golden summer sun over Hampshire had barely dipped below the horizon when the first sirens shattered the peace. High above Willowbrook Estate, a drone camera soared, sweeping across rolling fields, ancient oaks, and the shimmering haze of a heat wave. The world below looked idyllic, but a thin, angry plume of smoke coiled up in the distance, a warning growing by the minute. Inside the Pemberton family's grand but weathered dining room, Lady Charlotte Pemberton sat at the end of a heavy oak table, her slender hands clutched around a chipped teacup. The conversation was tense. Her uncle, red-faced and impatient, gestured at a stack of documents. "You're letting all this go to waste, Charlotte. Developers are lining up with offers, and you'd rather play country girl?" Charlotte's voice was steady but quiet. "This land means more than a check, Uncle." Her mother sighed, shaking her head. The room filled with the dull ache of disappointment, old family portraits glaring down from faded walls. Suddenly, her phone vibrated. 3 short, urgent rings. It was the local animal rescue coordinator. His voice strained. "Charlotte, it's bad. The fires jumped the brake line near Blackthorn Farm. We've got animals trapped, and the fire brigade can't get close enough. We need you now." For a split second, Charlotte hesitated. Official orders had just come through. All residents must stay clear of the forest's edge. But the panic in the man's voice cut through her hesitation. She jumped up, nearly knocking over her chair. "I'm going," she declared, grabbing her worn barber jacket and car keys. Her uncle stepped in her path. "You're not risking your neck for a bunch of strays." Charlotte's eyes flashed. "If it were your dog out there, would you want me to stay home?" Outside, the hot evening air smelled of scorched grass and fear. Flames flickered on the horizon. Ignoring every protest and the legal ban on entering the fire zone, Charlotte started up her battered Range Rover, the headlights slicing through the swirling smoke as she barreled toward the inferno. She passed fire trucks and police blockades. An officer yelled at her to stop, but she barely slowed. "Lady Charlotte, it's not safe. There are lives at stake." The Range Rover rumbled over a rough dirt path, Charlotte's heart pounding so loudly it seemed to drown out the sirens. In the distance, the abandoned Blackthorn Farm loomed, a skeletal shape, forgotten by all but the animals who had sheltered there. Charlotte skidded to a halt. The heat hit her like a wall. She ran toward the old stable, dodging sparks, her boots slipping in ash. The cries of terrified animals rang out over the roar of the flames. Smoke filled her lungs, but she pressed on, ducking low. She found the stable door jammed, warped by the heat. She slammed her shoulder against it, gritting her teeth, feeling it budge, inch by inch, until it burst open. Inside was chaos. An old chestnut mare thrashed against a fence, eyes rolling with terror. Chickens fluttered in a corner, and in the farthest stall something moved. A silver-gray pony, trembling, standing protectively over a limp foal. Charlotte's breath caught. The mare's sides were heaving, her flanks streaked with soot, but her gaze was sharp, defiant. Tempest, the wild pony Charlotte had seen once before, rumored to be uncatchable, and beneath her, a tiny foal, Storm, barely moving. As the flames crept closer, Tempest flattened her ears and snorted, blocking Charlotte from getting near the foal. "Easy, girl," Charlotte whispered, moving slowly, hands out. "I'm not here to hurt you." Tempest stamped her hoof, eyes wild, nostrils flaring. In the flickering light, Charlotte saw an old scar on Tempest's shoulder, proof of a hard life, of being hunted and escaped. "Please, let me help." Tempest hesitated. Behind her, the foal wheezed, legs twitching weakly. Charlotte's eyes stung, not just from smoke, but from helplessness. Suddenly, a timber above them groaned and split with a thunderous crack. Embers rained down, sizzling on the straw. No time to think. Charlotte lunged, grabbed the foal, and with a desperate surge of adrenaline, hoisted the small, limp body into her arms. Tempest screamed, a raw animal sound. Then, in a moment of trust, followed as Charlotte stumbled toward the door, barely dodging another falling beam. She nearly fell, Storm's head lolling against her chest, the world a blur of noise and fear. At the last second, Charlotte heard a shattering crash. The roof was coming down. She dove forward, rolling with Storm out into the night, Tempest bounding behind, smoke trailing from her mane. They sprawled on the dirt, breathless. Charlotte clutched the foal, her pulse hammering, tears and sweat streaking her face. For a second, the world held its breath. Tempest nosed Storm anxiously, then pressed her forehead against Charlotte's, as if to say, "Thank you." Behind them, the old stable collapsed in a roar of fire, sparks rising to meet the dark sky. Charlotte coughed, trying to steady her breathing, as distant voices shouted, firefighters, rescue volunteers rushing in. She looked at Storm's face, soot-streaked, eyes barely open. "Stay with me." Tempest circled them, standing guard, her sides heaving, every muscle tensed to defend her foal and this strange human who'd risked everything for them. In the swirling smoke and orange glow, a bond was forged, unspoken but unbreakable, a moment where fear, courage, and hope became one. The first light of dawn was still hours away, but somewhere in the chaos, Lady Charlotte Pemberton knew her life, and the fate of Willowbrook Estate had changed forever. Morning came reluctantly, casting pale gold through the drifting smoke that still lingered over the burnt edges of the new forest. All through the night, rescue teams had battled flames, shouting orders and dragging hoses across scorched earth. But in a hastily erected makeshift shelter behind the emergency command center, Charlotte had not moved. She sat curled on the rough straw, a scratchy rescue blanket draped around her shoulders. Storm nestled against her chest. Tempest, the wild pony, stood over them, her body rigid with tension, head lowered and eyes never leaving the smallest movement. Charlotte barely noticed the frantic activity outside, the officials hustling about, the drone of news crews setting up for early live broadcasts, the worried mutterings of neighbors and villagers who'd gathered at the perimeter. The only world that mattered was the trembling, barely breathing foal in her arms and the fierce, unwavering gaze of his mother. Storm shivered violently, legs tucked underneath, his sides moving in uneven, shallow breaths. Every so often, a convulsion of pain ran through his tiny frame. Charlotte spoke softly, words running together, a constant stream meant to calm herself as much as the animals. "I know it hurts, little guy. Hang on. You're safe now. I promise." Tempest shifted uneasily every time anyone approached, ears pinned back, eyes sharp with distrust. More than once, Charlotte's heart jumped as a firefighter or volunteer tentatively stepped toward the trio, only to freeze when Tempest let out a warning snort. The wild pony's stance was unmistakable. One wrong move, and she'd charge. Anxious whispers floated through the shelter. "Is that the wild New Forest mare? Someone said she's never let a human touch her before. That foal looks done for, but that woman's not leaving his side." At sunrise, Dr. James Whitmore arrived, medical kit slung over one shoulder, face set with grim determination. He crouched several yards away, voice low but clear. "Charlotte, let me help. The foal's in shock. He needs fluids and warmth. Can you get Tempest to back off?" Charlotte shook her head. She won't let anyone near. Not even you, James. She only trusts me for some reason. Maybe it's just desperation. I don't know. Tempest's muscles tensed at James's voice. She took a deliberate step forward, body a wall between the humans and her child. Charlotte reached out, resting her palm on Tempest's neck, feeling the quiver of adrenaline and fear. It's okay, girl. He's here to help. For a long moment, Tempest didn't move. Then, as if understanding the desperate plea, she snorted softly but stayed where she was, close, but not attacking. James nodded, inching a little closer. If you can hold him steady, I'll try to get a line in. Charlotte gently repositioned Storm, whispering comfort, her hands surprisingly steady despite the chaos in her mind. James reached out, slow and careful, preparing an IV line. Tempest bared her teeth, but Charlotte's voice stopped her. No, girl, trust me. James worked quickly. In a few tense minutes, Storm was hooked to a line, a warm saline drip running into his fragile vein. Tempest snorted and pawed the ground, but allowed it. The unspoken pact was holding, threadbare but intact. News of the rescue spread fast. Cameras flashed, reporters elbowed for angles. Locals whispered about Lady Charlotte, the stubborn Pemberton girl, risking her life for wild horses. By noon, a crowd had formed beyond the emergency tape. Villagers from Little Bramford, city transplants, a few curious tourists. Some carried homemade signs. Save the New Forest ponies, and thank you, Charlotte. A reporter from the BBC, microphone in hand, called out, Lady Charlotte, can you tell us what happened? Is the foal going to survive? Charlotte barely looked up. I don't know yet. All that matters is he's alive and with his mother. That's all any of us can hope for. Tempest became a legend in a matter of hours. People whispered about the way she kept her body between Charlotte and every would-be helper, the way she glared at any stranger who came too close. No matter how exhausted she was, she didn't rest. She stood sentinel, watching, waiting, refusing food and water unless Charlotte offered it to her directly. That afternoon, a government vehicle rolled in, bringing Inspector Margaret Thornfield, a tall, stern woman in DEFRA uniform. She spoke to the rescue leader, then approached Charlotte, her steps precise, clipboard in hand. I'm sorry, Lady Charlotte, but under the Animal Welfare Act and new forest regulations, these animals are classified as wild. Technically, you're not permitted to keep them here. There are protocols. Charlotte cut her off, her voice tired but unyielding. I'm not giving them up, Inspector. Not until that foal is strong enough to stand. If you try to separate them now, he'll die. A standoff hung in the air. Thornfield glanced at Tempest, noting the pony's bared teeth and defiant eyes. I see your point. For now. But this is only temporary. Evening crept in, bringing relief from the worst of the heat. Volunteers gathered around a fire, sharing food and quiet words. But Charlotte stayed with Storm, only stepping away to fetch more water or a fresh blanket. Tempest shadowed her every move, never more than a stride behind. Late at night, as exhaustion finally threatened to claim her, Charlotte lay down on the straw, one arm still protectively over Storm's frail body. Tempest stood above them, head drooping but eyes alert, a living shield. In the fragile peace of the early hours, as the first hints of dawn brightened the sky, Charlotte felt Tempest's warm breath on her face. The pony nuzzled her gently, as if granting permission to rest. Outside, a hush fell. The world, for a moment, was just three hearts bound by fate and fire. And as Charlotte drifted into uneasy sleep, she sensed something had shifted, not just in the wild pony's eyes, but in her own heart. Whatever happened next, she knew she would never let them face it alone. A thin mist drifted across the fields of Willowbrook Estate as Charlotte guided her battered Range Rover up the winding drive, Tempest and Storm riding in the borrowed animal trailer behind her. The old estate came into view, its weathered stone house and sprawling pastures tinged gold by the morning sun. For generations, Willowbrook had stood as a symbol of the Pemberton family, a legacy of both privilege and expectation, now resting heavily on Charlotte's shoulders. She stepped out, her boots crunching on the gravel, and opened the trailer door. Tempest hesitated at first, nostrils flaring at the unfamiliar scents, but Charlotte stood steady, hand outstretched, murmuring softly. Storm, wobbly but stronger than the day before, blinked in the light, his silver coat streaked with new hope and old ash. Together, they took their first cautious steps onto the estate grounds. A pair of stable hands, old family employees who remembered Charlotte as a little girl, watched silently. One, Mrs. Hopper, offered a smile edged with worry. "Welcome home, miss. Didn't expect you back with 2 new mouths to feed, and wild ones at that." Charlotte smiled tiredly. "They're not just mouths, they're family now." She led Tempest and Storm to an empty paddock farthest from the road, where the grass grew tall and untouched. The estate's other horses grazed in nearby fields, eyeing the newcomers with curiosity. As Charlotte opened the gate, Tempest hesitated, scanning the landscape, searching for threats, until Charlotte whispered, "You're safe. No one's chasing you here." The next hours blurred into a gentle rhythm. Charlotte fetched buckets of fresh water and laid out sweet hay. She cleaned wounds, changed Storm's bandages, and sat for long stretches by the paddock fence, letting the wild pair adjust to the sounds and smells of their new home. Storm tried to nurse from Tempest, finally strong enough to stagger around on wobbly legs, while his mother kept a wary eye on anyone who came near. Charlotte was patient. She moved slowly, learning that even a small gesture, a sudden shift, a raised voice, could send Tempest into a panic. Each day was a new lesson in humility and listening. In the afternoons, Charlotte wandered the estate, memories flooding back. She remembered chasing butterflies by the river as a child, her grandmother teaching her the names of every wildflower that bloomed in the meadows. Now, she felt those roots pulling her deeper into the land. The estate had once been her entire world, then a prison of expectation, and now, maybe, a sanctuary. One evening, as she stood in the quiet stables, her phone buzzed. Emily Davies's name flashed on the screen. "How are they settling in?" Emily asked, her voice bright with genuine concern. "Tempest is still nervous, but Storm is stronger every day. I've never seen a foal fight so hard just to stand." Emily hesitated, then said, "You know there's talk in town. Some say you're throwing away everything, bringing wild ponies onto the estate." Charlotte sighed, feeling the weight of judgment. "Let them talk. I didn't come back to Willowbrook to impress anyone." Later that night, Charlotte sat by the window of her childhood bedroom, writing in her journal. The room was still decorated with faded wallpaper and childhood trophies, remnants of a different life, a life where she was supposed to follow in her family's footsteps, to become someone worthy of the Pemberton name. She remembered the pressure from her parents, top schools, proper friends, an internship in a gleaming London skyscraper. Yet even at the height of her city life, Charlotte had always felt restless, haunted by the call of open fields and star-streaked nights. Flashbacks mingled with the night air, the endless parties, the champagne laughter, the uncomfortable feeling that she was always wearing someone else's skin. After her grandmother's death, the estate passed to her. The others expected her to sell, liquidate the past, start fresh somewhere glamorous. But Charlotte couldn't do it. She had tried to make it in London, but the city's glass towers and endless rush never felt like home. The real world was dirt under her nails, the soft snort of a nervous pony, the slow, quiet work of building trust. Every morning, Charlotte woke before dawn and walked to the paddock, watching the way mist curled around Tempest and Storm as they grazed in the new day. She studied their body language, learning to speak hoarse with patience, head tilts, ear flicks, the subtle twitch of a tail. Storm, ever the curious soul, began to approach her first, nudging her pockets for apples, stumbling playfully at her heels. Tempest remained cautious, but gradually accepted gentle touches, her eyes softer when Charlotte was near. One afternoon, Dr. Whitmore arrived to check on Storm's progress. He was pleased to find the foal's breathing stronger, the wounds healing. "You've done a miracle here," he said, nodding at Charlotte. "It's not just me," she replied, glancing at Tempest. "She's the brave one. I'm just learning to listen." Days turned to weeks, and Willowbrook found a new rhythm. Charlotte spent her mornings tending the animals, her afternoons working through estate papers and old family ledgers. She ignored the letters from developers, the calls from relatives urging her to reconsider. At night, she walked the fields under the stars, always checking to make sure Tempest and Storm were safe. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, when Storm stumbled, or when Tempest spooked at a distant car. There were family dinners thick with silent disapproval, village rumors about the mad Pemberton girl and her wild ponies. But there were also moments of joy. Storm's first full gallop across the paddock, Tempest's gentle nuzzle at Charlotte's hand, the sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. By the end of the third week, something in Charlotte had changed. She was no longer just the reluctant heiress of Willowbrook. She was a caretaker, a bridge between worlds, and, most unexpectedly, a mother to a pair of wild hearts who for the first time had begun to call this land home. And as the sun set over the rolling hills, casting long shadows across the estate, Charlotte finally understood what it meant to belong. The first hints of autumn colored the edges of the trees around Willowbrook Estate as September crept in. Charlotte had settled into a rhythm, waking at sunrise to check on Tempest and Storm, then spending long afternoons tending the land and working on estate business. But beneath the gentle routine, questions lingered. Where had Tempest come from? And what had she endured before fate pushed her into Charlotte's world? It was a crisp Sunday morning when Charlotte first noticed something odd about Tempest's shoulder. The mare had always carried herself stiffly, but as Charlotte brushed her silver-gray coat, a patch of hair fell away, revealing a faint tattoo, a sequence of faded numbers and letters, barely legible, inked deep in the skin. Charlotte's heart skipped. She crouched, tracing the markings with her fingertips, feeling Tempest's muscles twitch beneath her hand. "Where did you come from, girl? And what happened to you out there?" That afternoon, Charlotte snapped a photo of the tattoo and sent it to Emily Davies. Emily, ever resourceful, worked for Natural England and had access to records Charlotte could only dream of. Within the hour, Emily replied with a voice note, her tone grave. "Just that code is from a government rewilding program, Charlotte. Years ago, they tried to reintroduce wild ponies from other regions into the new forest. Some of the animals never adapted. There were escapes, neglect, and, well, it wasn't a success. It looks like Tempest was part of that failed experiment." The revelation hit Charlotte like a punch. She sat on the porch steps, staring out at Tempest grazing with Storm in the field. What kind of life had this mare survived before finding her way here? Later that night, Charlotte dove into research. Her laptop glowed in the darkness as she pored over DEFRA reports, news articles, animal welfare laws. The more she read, the clearer it became. The rewilding project had been a PR disaster, with ponies either vanishing or ending up in terrible conditions. There were strict legal guidelines about wild horses: ownership, registration, even the right to keep them on private land. Storm, meanwhile, was thriving. His limp was almost gone, his eyes bright with curiosity. Some days he chased butterflies through the grass, his foal's whinny echoing across the field. Other times, he'd press against Charlotte's hip, nuzzling for treats, until Tempest would whinny and call him back, her protective instincts as sharp as ever. Yet the shadows of Tempest's past loomed large. Emily visited that weekend, bringing a folder of printed records and a worried look. If someone reports you, DEFRA or animal control could make trouble, especially if they connect Tempest's tattoo to that program. Wild ponies are legally complicated, and with everything going on, Charlotte nodded, flipping through the legal jargon. "Everything going on?" she asked. Emily hesitated. "There's a developer sniffing around. Sir Reginald Blackwood. He's trying to buy up parcels around New Forest for a new luxury resort. He's got friends in local government, and he doesn't take no for an answer." Charlotte felt a chill settle in her bones. Blackwood's name was whispered in village shops and at the pub, always with a hint of dread. "He wants Willowbrook?" Emily nodded. "He'll use any angle he can. Don't give him one." Determined to protect her new family, Charlotte spent the next week learning everything she could about animal law. She sat up late at the old kitchen table, stacks of papers and highlighters everywhere, jotting notes in a battered legal pad. The Animal Welfare Act 2006, the New Forest Pony Regulations, the tangled mess of rewilding program records. She memorized it all. She even called Dr. Whitmore, who confirmed the stakes. If anyone decides those horses are a threat, or that you're keeping them illegally, it won't just be paperwork. They could be seized and sent to a sanctuary, or worse, euthanized if they're deemed unmanageable. Charlotte's stomach twisted. That won't happen. I'll fight them every step. The next Sunday, Charlotte organized a quiet gathering at Willowbrook. She invited local animal lovers, a few trusted neighbors, and Emily. The group shared tea and homemade scones while Charlotte explained Tempest and Storm's situation and asked for advice and support if trouble came knocking. One older woman, Mrs. Wallace, nodded fiercely. "You saved those ponies, Charlotte. You can count on us. This village won't turn on its own." After the guests left, Charlotte walked down to the paddock. Dusk was falling, the fields aglow with late summer fireflies. Storm nipped playfully at her sleeve, Tempest watching with that familiar wariness, but her gaze was softer now, a silent acknowledgement of trust. Suddenly, a luxury black sedan rolled up the drive. The air shifted. Charlotte tensed, standing protectively between her horses and the approaching car. Out stepped Sir Reginald Blackwood himself, impeccably dressed, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. "Good evening, Lady Charlotte. Beautiful estate. I thought I'd pay my respects and discuss an offer for Willowbrook." Charlotte kept her tone civil but icy. "I'm not interested, Sir Reginald. My answer is the same as last time." Blackwood smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Oh, I think you'll reconsider. See, I've heard there are certain irregularities with your new livestock. You wouldn't want the authorities to think you're in violation of animal regulations, would you? Could make things messy, fast. Charlotte's jaw tightened, but she didn't back down. I'm not intimidated, and I know the law. Please leave. Blackwood gave a little bow, his eyes gleaming with quiet menace. We'll be in touch. After the car disappeared, Charlotte stood trembling, fury and fear twisting inside her. She knew then, the battle for Tempest, Storm, and Willowbrook was just beginning. But with each sunset, with every gentle nudge from her unlikely family, Charlotte's resolve hardened. Whatever scars Tempest carried, whatever ghosts haunted these fields, they would face them together, no matter the cost. The air at Willowbrook turned tense in the days after Blackwood's visit. Charlotte went about her chores with an alertness she hadn't felt since her first days back on the estate. Every sound, an unfamiliar car on the drive, voices near the hedgerow, a phone ringing late at night, set her nerves on edge. She'd seen the look in Blackwood's eyes, and she knew he was the kind of man who didn't take no for an answer. Word spread fast in the village. Some neighbors brought pies and quiet encouragement. Others kept their distance, wary of being caught up in whatever storm was brewing between Charlotte and the powerful developer. At the edge of the estate, men in high-vis jackets measured fence lines and took notes, their presence explained away as land surveyors, though Charlotte doubted their neutrality. She logged every visit, every odd car parked on the lane. One foggy morning, Charlotte was brushing Tempest in the paddock, Storm chasing after crows in the tall grass, when Mrs. Hopper appeared at the fence, face tight with worry. There's a car at the main gate, miss. Fancy one? 2 men and a woman, all in suits. Charlotte's pulse quickened. Thank you, Mrs. Hopper. Please stay with the horses. She walked briskly to the house. At the door stood Inspector Margaret Thornfield from DEFRA, 2 stern-faced officials in tow, clipboards at the ready. Behind them, a black luxury sedan idled, its tinted windows reflecting the estate's stone facade. Charlotte barely had time to gather herself before Thornfield began. Lady Charlotte, I'm here on official business. We've received several complaints about unregistered wild animals being kept on this property. Under the Animal Welfare Act and new forest regulations, I am required to perform an immediate inspection. Charlotte's mouth went dry, but she met Thornfield's gaze, refusing to flinch. Of course. Please follow me. They made their way to the paddock. Tempest sensed something was wrong. Her head shot up, ears pinned, nostrils wide. Storm ran to Charlotte, pressing against her leg as the officials surveyed the field. Thornfield spoke into a recorder, her tone clipped. Subject is a silver-gray pony, female, approximately 8 years old. Visible tattoo, New Forest Rewilding Code. Foal, male, appears to be approximately 3 months. Both animals are mobile, alert, and in apparent good health. The male official scribbled notes. The other, a woman with sharp eyes, took photographs. Charlotte stood between Tempest and the strangers, her hand resting on Storm's withers. These animals are under veterinary care. I have documentation from Dr. Whitmore confirming their condition and treatment. They pose no risk to people or other animals. Thornfield flipped through her folder. You realize, Lady Charlotte, that the law is clear regarding wild equines. Ownership and custody are restricted. There's also a question of whether these animals should be relocated to a licensed sanctuary. At that moment, Tempest took a few aggressive steps toward the fence, head low, body tense, a wild animal defending her own. Charlotte's voice was calm but firm. If you try to separate them now, You will traumatize both mother and foal. They nearly died in the fire. They trust me. They won't survive being moved again." The two officials exchanged glances. The woman muttered, "She's right about the trauma risk, Margaret." Before Thornfield could reply, another car pulled up. A gleaming Jaguar, unmistakably Blackwood's. He stepped out, waving cheerfully. "Well, this is quite the gathering. Inspector, always a pleasure. I do hope you're able to help Lady Charlotte sort out her little predicament." Charlotte felt fury rise. "You have no business here, Sir Reginald." Blackwood's smile was razor-sharp. "On the contrary, I have every business here. I'm a concerned member of the community. I've made generous offers to help Lady Charlotte with the burden of this estate. It pains me to see it mismanaged." He turned to Thornfield. "You know as well as I do that regulations are the backbone of our society. If rules are broken, there are consequences." Thornfield's face betrayed nothing. "Thank you for your concern, Sir Reginald. Our investigation will proceed according to protocol." Blackwood's eyes flicked from Tempest to Charlotte. "You're young, Lady Charlotte. Passion is admirable, but you must think of the bigger picture. There are people relying on this land for jobs, the economy. Progress waits for no one. Certainly not for a couple of wild ponies." Charlotte stood her ground. "This estate is not for sale, and you're not going to scare me into giving up these animals. You know as well as I do that you've been pressuring the local council to force my hand." A cold silence followed. Thornfield closed her folder. "This is now an open file, Lady Charlotte. I will need to review your veterinary documentation and will return for further inspection. In the meantime, any attempt to move or conceal these animals will be viewed as obstruction." As the officials left, Blackwood lingered. He leaned in, voice a whisper only Charlotte could hear. "You're fighting a losing battle. Think carefully about what you're risking, and for what. This won't end well for you, or for them." Charlotte watched the cars disappear down the drive. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to breathe. Mrs. Hopper appeared beside her, tears in her eyes. "You won't let them take the horses, will you, miss?" Charlotte shook her head. "Not while I have breath left." That night, Charlotte lay awake listening to the sounds of the estate. An owl hooting, Storm's soft whinnies, Tempest's steady breathing outside her window. Every shadow seemed longer, every threat closer. But as dawn crept in, so did resolve. The enemy was no longer at the gate. He was inside, knocking at her door. And Charlotte was ready. The following days unfolded in a blur of paperwork, anxiety, and whispered arguments behind closed doors. A heavy envelope from DEFRA landed on Charlotte's desk, stamped urgent. She tore it open with trembling hands, heart hammering as she read, "Notice of immediate review and potential removal of wild equines from private property." The words blurred together, the threat clear. If she didn't comply, Tempest and Storm could be seized at any time. Her family's patience wore thin. At breakfast, her uncle slammed his mug down, coffee sloshing over the rim. "This has gone far enough, Charlotte. Sell the land, end this circus. You can't win against the law, or Blackwood." Charlotte's mother avoided her gaze, voice brittle. "You could start over, darling. Use the money. Move back to London. We all want what's best for you." But Charlotte's jaw set stubbornly. "What's best for me is fighting for what's right." The silence at the table was icy. She felt more alone than ever. Later that morning, as the sun struggled to break through gray clouds, Charlotte sat in the drafty parlor, surrounded by legal documents and animal welfare statutes. She made call after call, to DEFRA, to animal rights groups, to her family solicitor, to Dr. Whitmore, anyone who might help. Every conversation ended the same way. There's no precedent, Charlotte. The law isn't on your side. Your best hope is to prove the animals are domesticated and pose no danger. But with the publicity and Blackwood's connections, it'll be an uphill battle. A sharp knock startled her. She opened the door to find Dr. Whitmore and Emily Davies standing on the porch, their faces drawn but determined. "We heard," James said. "You're not fighting this alone." Emily added, "A few friends from Natural England are gathering statements, and some folks in the village want to start a petition. There's more support than you think." Something in Charlotte's chest loosened. For the first time in days, she managed to smile. "I don't even know where to start." "Let's start with facts," James replied. "I'll write a full veterinary report, documenting every step of Storm and Tempest's recovery. Emily can compile legal precedents, cases where animals were allowed to remain for welfare reasons. We'll need statements from people who've witnessed the pony's behavior. And you, Charlotte? You'll need to speak from the heart. This is as much about public opinion as it is about the law." Charlotte nodded, rolling up her sleeves. She spent hours gathering photos, vet records, every scrap of evidence that proved how far Tempest and Storm had come since that night in the fire. She drafted a letter to DEFRA, every word a plea. These ponies are not wild menaces. They are survivors, family. To take them now would destroy everything we've fought for, everything I've become since returning to Willowbrook. The nights were the hardest. She sat alone in the darkened kitchen, fear swirling in her mind. What if it wasn't enough? What if Blackwood found another loophole, or an official decided by the letter of the law rather than compassion? Once, as the clock struck 2, she broke down in silent sobs, head in her hands. The thought of Storm, innocent, trusting, being hauled away, or Tempest penned up in some unfamiliar sanctuary, was almost too much to bear. She wandered outside, drawn by instinct. The paddock was silent, but for the faint sound of Storm's breathing, Tempest's dark silhouette standing guard in the moonlight. Charlotte leaned on the fence, wiping tears from her face. Without warning, Tempest approached, her movements slow and deliberate. She pressed her head gently to Charlotte's shoulder, warm breath mingling with the cool night air. Charlotte closed her eyes, letting herself be comforted by the one she'd been fighting so hard to protect. "I promise I won't give up on you. Not ever." In the days that followed, the estate became a flurry of activity. Supporters trickled in, neighbors dropping off fresh bread and notes of encouragement, a local lawyer volunteering his time, teens from the village designing a website to spread word of the campaign. Emily coordinated press interviews, careful to frame the story as one of courage and compassion rather than defiance. A reporter from The Guardian came to visit, snapping photos of Charlotte leading Storm around the field, of Tempest grazing contentedly, of the battered Range Rover parked stubbornly in the mud. When the article was published, social media erupted with support. Save Tempest and Storm trended for a day. Letters poured in from animal lovers across the country, some offering donations, others sharing stories of their own rescued animals. Charlotte's heart ached with gratitude. For the first time, hope outpaced fear, but the fight was far from over. One afternoon, as Charlotte met with James and Emily on the back patio, a sleek Mercedes rolled up the drive. Blackwood stepped out, his expression as polished as ever. "Still tilting at windmills, Lady Charlotte?" He waved a folder. "My lawyers assure me you're running out of time. Why drag this out? Sell the land. Save yourself the heartache. Charlotte stood, her voice unwavering. I'd rather lose everything than betray them or myself. Blackwood's smile faded. Stubbornness won't save you. After he left, Charlotte watched the sun dip below the hills, her resolve sharpened by the shadows growing long across the estate. She knew the next battle would be fought in courtrooms and headlines, and maybe even in the very soul of Willowbrook itself. But for now, surrounded by her allies and the wild hearts that had become her family, she chose to believe that sometimes the right thing was worth fighting for, even if you had to stand alone to prove it. By the end of that week, Willowbrook was no longer just Charlotte's fight. What began as a lonely battle for Tempest and Storm now rippled far beyond the estate's boundaries. News stories multiplied, each one painting Charlotte as either a foolish romantic or a new kind of heroine. Support letters came from as far as Scotland and Cornwall, some stuffed with pressed wildflowers, others with handmade drawings of ponies and the words, "Let them stay." But the most dramatic change unfolded in Little Bramford itself. It began with quiet conversations at the village bakery, spilled over into the local pub, and finally broke out on the green when a group of retirees, usually more concerned with cricket scores than activism, proposed a community meeting. The turnout stunned even the organizers. Farmers in muddy boots, teenagers with skateboards, elderly women with knitting bags, city folks who'd moved for a simpler life. Everyone came, crowding onto picnic benches under the wide Hampshire sky. At the heart of it all was the question, should Little Bramford stand with Willowbrook or stand aside? Emily Davies stood up first, voice clear. I know some of you think Charlotte's bringing trouble here, but I work for Natural England, and I can tell you, what she's doing is right. Those ponies would have died if not for her. They're not a threat. What's dangerous is letting big money decide who belongs and who doesn't. A round of murmurs, then old Mrs. Wallace, cane in hand, thumped it on the table. We've lived next to that estate for 50 years. Never once has the Pemberton land caused harm. Why let some fancy developer take it? Why punish kindness? It took only an hour to draft a letter of support. By sunset, over 200 villagers, nearly every adult, had signed it. The next morning, Charlotte woke to find the document slipped under her door, along with a card. We're with you. We're not letting them take your family, human or horse. That was just the beginning. On a chilly Saturday morning, Charlotte opened her curtains to find a line of cars snaking up the drive. People spilled out, carrying hand-painted signs, flasks of tea, and homemade sandwiches. Emily and a few others had organized a peaceful demonstration. At first, Charlotte was overwhelmed. She stepped outside, still in her old barn jacket and muddy boots, to applause and cheers. Don't worry, Emily grinned, pressing a mug of hot coffee into her hand. We'll handle the media circus. You just be yourself. Reporters descended on Willowbrook in droves. The BBC van parked near the main gate. Local radio ran interviews with Charlotte, Dr. Whitmore, and several villagers. An aerial drone from a regional paper captured sweeping shots of the demonstration, a living shield around the estate. People and homemade banners forming a protective ring between the world and Tempest's paddock. Even the other horses seemed to understand. They clustered at the fences, nickering at the crowd, their presence adding to the spectacle. Tempest and Storm watched from the safety of the barn, curious but calm. For once, Tempest didn't panic at the sight of strangers. Perhaps she sensed that for today, none of them meant harm. The official government convoy arrived just after noon. 3 DEFRA cars, Thornfield at the helm. She stepped out, clipboard clutched tight, surveying the peaceful crowd with a sigh. "Please, folks, I need you to disperse. This is official business. We have orders to evaluate the welfare of these animals and the compliance of this property." A few villagers muttered, but nobody moved. Instead, Mrs. Wallace called out, "We're not blocking your inspection. We're just making sure no one's bullied into silence." Thornfield hesitated, perhaps realizing that any heavy-handed move would make tomorrow's front page. She motioned to her team, "Proceed, but be respectful." The inspection went on for hours. DEFRA officers photographed every inch of the paddock, examined Tempest's tattoo, reviewed Dr. Whitmore's medical files. Charlotte answered questions, standing tall, her community at her back. At one point, Storm wobbled over, nuzzling her hand in front of the cameras. The image made the next morning's news. A village stands guard. The battle for Willowbrook's wild hearts. Blackwood arrived late in the afternoon, stepping from his Jaguar with forced calm. This time, the villagers did not let him pass unchallenged. A line of children and teens holding hands blocked the path. He tried to laugh it off. "Let's not be unreasonable, kids. This is a matter for adults." A teenager stared him down. "We're not moving, sir. We're here for Charlotte and the horses." Blackwood's smile grew tight. He called Thornfield over, whispered urgently. Within minutes, a flustered DEFRA officer approached Charlotte. "We've received additional documentation, an anonymous report of irregularities with your estate's land use. I'm sorry, Lady Charlotte, but we'll need to begin a full investigation into all your livestock, not just the ponies." Charlotte's heart pounded. She could see Blackwood's fingerprints all over this move. But she held her ground, and so did her supporters. As dusk fell, the crowd sang an old folk song, voices rising over the fields. Candles and lanterns glimmered in the twilight. Charlotte stood at the paddock fence, Emily by her side, listening to the music and watching as Tempest and Storm grazed peacefully. For the first time in weeks, she felt something close to peace. But fate was not done with Willowbrook. That night, as villagers drifted home, a young reporter from a London paper cornered Emily with a hushed confession. "I've been digging, and I found something big. Blackwood has a direct financial link to a councilman who authorized this inspection. There's evidence of backroom deals and hush money. This could change everything." Emily's eyes widened. She turned to Charlotte, voice shaking with hope and anger. "This isn't just your fight anymore. If we expose him, maybe we can end it all." Charlotte looked out over her land, the people who had come to stand with her, and the wild ponies that had changed her life. In that moment, she realized the battle for Willowbrook had become much bigger than just her, Tempest, or even the law. It had become a battle for justice, for community, and for the right of wild hearts, human and animal alike, to find safety and a place to call home. A restless gray dawn hung over Willowbrook Estate as word spread that this was the day. The DEFRA officials, with full police escort, were coming to enforce the removal order. The community's hopes and anxieties churned like the low clouds gathering above the fields. Charlotte hadn't slept. She'd spent the night moving from room to room, checking on Tempest and Storm, glancing out the window at the shifting shapes of villagers camped in cars and tents along the drive. By 7, the gates of Willowbrook swelled with people. Neighbors with flasks of coffee, teenagers wrapped in scarves and blankets, reporters with cameras mounted and notepads ready. The village vicar led a quiet prayer circle on the green, while Mrs. Wallace, armed with her cane and formidable will, barked orders to volunteers setting up a human chain around the paddock. Emily and Dr. Whitmore arrived together, bearing more than just moral support. "It's everywhere now," Emily whispered, showing Charlotte her phone. "Save Tempest and Storm is all over the country. BBC, The Guardian, even American animal rights groups are sharing your story." Dr. Whitmore handed Charlotte a fresh file. "More medical evidence? Storm is fit. Tempest's behavioral change is remarkable. It's not just about the law anymore. It's about what's right." At 8 sharp, the government convoy rolled up the lane. 3 DEFRA cars, 2 police SUVs, and at their head, a sleek Jaguar carrying Sir Reginald Blackwood. He stepped out in a tailored navy suit, lips curved in a self-satisfied smirk, phone glued to his ear. He looked utterly confident, as if the estate was already his. Inspector Margaret Thornfield, pale and composed, exited her car. Her eyes flicked over the crowd, at once resolute and regretful. "Lady Charlotte Pemberton," she called, her voice carrying. "We are here to execute the court order for the removal of 2 unregistered wild equines. Please comply peacefully." Charlotte met her at the paddock fence, a sea of faces behind her, Tempest and Storm watching anxiously. "With all due respect, Inspector," Charlotte replied, voice steady but raw, "I am not handing them over. They have a home here. The law may not recognize the bond we have, but I won't let fear or money decide their fate." Blackwood strode forward, waving his phone. "The law is clear, Charlotte. This is the end of your little fairy tale. These animals go or this property faces full seizure for regulatory violations. I suggest you step aside and think of your family's reputation." He gestured for the police to advance. Officers moved toward the gate. But then the villagers, hundreds strong, stood shoulder to shoulder, silent but immovable, blocking the path. Someone held a handmade sign, "Dignity for all creatures." The police paused, uncertainty flickering on their faces. Tempest snorted, ears back, muscles tight. Storm pressed into Charlotte's side, wide-eyed. Thornfield's voice wavered just for a moment. "Please, Charlotte, this isn't the way." Charlotte shook her head. "It's the only way. If you want them, you'll have to go through me and everyone here." Blackwood's smile slipped. "Arrest her if you must." He spat, turning red. Just then, a commotion rippled through the crowd. The young London reporter Emily had spoken to the night before pushed forward, waving a folder. "Wait! There's new evidence. Sir Reginald Blackwood has been making illegal payments to local officials involved in these inspections." Gasps echoed. Cameras swung toward Blackwood, whose face darkened. Thornfield's eyes narrowed as she took the folder. "I have copies of wire transfers, emails. There's enough here to start an investigation. The real reason for these actions wasn't animal welfare. It was private gain. If DEFRA proceeds, you'll be part of the scandal, Inspector." A heavy silence fell. For a long moment, no one moved. Thornfield, papers in hand, whispered to her team. The police, now on edge, stepped back. Blackwood blustered, voice hoarse. "This is preposterous. You have nothing. It's all fabricated." But the villagers, emboldened, began to chant, "Let them stay! Let them stay!" Tempest threw up her head, and for the first time gave a wild, echoing whinny that soared over the fields, a sound of fear and defiance and hope. In the confusion, Charlotte's heart hammered with terror and relief. But then, in a moment no one could have predicted, Tempest wheeled around, calling to Storm. The foal, as if understanding something no human could, bolted through an opening at the edge of the paddock where the old gate had been left unlatched. Tempest followed, mane streaming, as the 2 horses thundered out of Willowbrook, past the startled villagers, past the government officials, and vanished into the rising mist of the new forest. A stunned hush descended. Charlotte ran after them, breathless, but the woods swallowed mother and foal in a matter of seconds. Tears blurred her vision as she reached the edge of the trees. Emily caught up, pulling her into a hug. "You didn't lose, Charlotte. Look at everyone. You changed something. For them. For all of us." Back at the house, Thornfield emerged, voice subdued. "The removal order is suspended pending an official inquiry. Sir Reginald will have to answer to these new allegations. But I'm sorry about the ponies. I truly am." Blackwood, surrounded by flashing cameras and angry shouts, was led away by police for questioning. As evening came and the villagers drifted home, Charlotte sat alone by the fence, the estate strangely quiet without Tempest and Storm. She closed her eyes and listened, not for sirens or angry voices, but for the echo of wild hooves and the memory of trust earned and given. The world had watched Willowbrook and witnessed the triumph of courage over greed, of community over power. The fight wasn't over, but the story had changed. Somewhere in the depths of the forest, two wild hearts had claimed their freedom. And for Charlotte, there was pain, but also a strange, fierce peace. 6 months had slipped by since that fateful day at Willowbrook. Autumn had bled into winter, then into the first hesitant green of spring. For Charlotte, the world felt different, quieter, as if everything that had mattered before had faded into the background. Yet beneath the hush, something inside her had come alive, an understanding so deep she could not help but be changed by it. The estate was peaceful now, the legal chaos settled. News of Blackwood's arrest had made national headlines. The councilman caught in his web resigned in disgrace. A new DEFRA inquiry, prompted by public outcry, led to reforms that would protect animals in circumstances just like Tempest and Storms. But the paddock at Willowbrook remained empty, save for the old family horses grazing at a distance. Tempest and Storm were gone, their presence lingering only in Charlotte's memory and dreams. For weeks after their escape, Charlotte walked the boundaries of the estate every dawn and dusk, scanning the horizon, hoping for a glimpse of silver in the mist. She followed hoofprints through muddy thickets, listened to every distant whinny, called their names into the stillness. Sometimes she caught what she swore was Storm's echo, high and bright. But the ponies remained free, wild in the vast sanctuary of New Forest, beyond the reach of fences and fear. People sent letters, some to console, some to ask if she regretted it all. She kept them in a box on her desk, along with a faded horseshoe Tempest had lost during the fire. She read them on sleepless nights. You gave them a second chance. Your courage inspired our whole family to volunteer at a rescue. I hope, wherever they are, they remember you. In those quiet hours, Charlotte began to write. What started as a journal to make sense of the loss grew into a book, When Wild Hearts Choose to Stay. She wrote of the night in the fire, of learning to trust, of the battles with Blackwood, and the loneliness of doing what was right when the world tried to convince her she was wrong. Her words flowed not with bitterness, but with gratitude. She wrote about what Tempest had taught her, that love wasn't about ownership, but about letting go when the time came. To her surprise, the book resonated. It became a bestseller, not just in Hampshire, but across the UK. Readers sent more letters, telling Charlotte how the story made them look at their own lives, at the animals, at the people, at the things they'd held too tightly, and the peace that came with release. Invitations came in for interviews, podcasts, panels about animal welfare and the true meaning of nobility. Charlotte accepted some, always returning home to Willowbrook with the same longing ache. She found comfort in the land, in the loyal old horses that remained, in the rhythm of the seasons. One evening, as the last light spilled over the fields, Charlotte sat on the weathered bench at the edge of the woods. She listened to the breeze sifting through new leaves, the distant calls of birds, the far-off rumble of a tractor from the next farm. She thought about all that had changed, how Willowbrook had gone from battleground to sanctuary, how little Bramford had become a village united not just by resistance, but by hope. Emily Davies often visited, sometimes bringing city friends who wanted to see the place that had changed the law. Dr. Whitmore remained her confidant, tending to the old herd and checking in, even when there was no medical need. The villagers still stopped by, some to talk, some just to stand for a while in the silence, remembering the sight of hundreds standing together in defense of two wild ponies. But as the months wore on, Charlotte realized that the most profound lessons were not about winning or losing, but about the space between holding on and letting go. She remembered something her grandmother once told her. True love gives freedom, even when it hurts. You can't keep wildness in a paddock and call it happiness. On the day her book launched in London, Charlotte found herself sitting alone in a hotel room, looking out at the gray city skyline. She missed the wide Hampshire sky, the muddy boots, the soft nicker of horses at dusk. And in that moment, she knew she could never leave Willowbrook. Not really. The estate, with all its history and heartbreak, had become a place of healing, not just for animals, but for her own soul. She returned home that night, pulling into the drive as mist drifted across the paddocks. A small group of villagers were waiting, holding lanterns, there to welcome her back. They handed her a letter, scrawled in a childish hand. Dear Lady Charlotte, I hope Tempest and Storm are happy. My mum says you did the bravest thing in the world. I think you are the best. Please write back. Charlotte blinked back tears, clutching the note to her chest. For all she'd lost, she'd gained something she hadn't even known she was missing. The respect of her community, the love of her friends, and the knowledge that her choices had mattered. That spring, she started a new tradition, inviting children from the village to visit the estate, teaching them about the wild ponies, about animal welfare, about the value of standing up for what's right. She showed them the hoofprints in the mud, the chewed fence rails, and the soft, trampled grass where two wild hearts had slept. As she stood with the children one golden afternoon, Charlotte looked out over the fields and knew at last that happiness wasn't about keeping what you loved at all costs. Sometimes, true happiness was about letting go, about trusting that those you set free would find their way, that the love you gave would live on in the choices you made. In the end, the lesson Tempest and Storm had given was simple but eternal. Real nobility isn't in wealth or titles, but in kindness, courage, and the willingness to let go. And in the quiet hush of Willowbrook, beneath the endless English sky, Charlotte felt at peace, knowing that her wild family was out there, free as they were always meant to be. Summer had returned to Hampshire, painting Willowbrook Estate in lush green and soft gold. The scars from last year's fire had faded, replaced by wildflowers that Charlotte had sown herself. Bluebells, primroses, foxgloves, flowers that now waved in the breeze where once flames had raged. The estate was alive with renewal, not only in the fields and hedgerows, but in the very spirit of the place. Charlotte Pemberton stood on the gentle rise behind the house, gazing out over the land her family had held for centuries, feeling the pulse of something much older and much wiser than any title could bestow. In the months following the scandal, everything had changed. Blackwood was sentenced for bribery and fraud, forced to pay restitution to the village and to several wildlife charities. His luxury development stalled, his name now a cautionary tale whispered in council halls. The officials who'd helped him were gone, replaced by new faces, some young, some old, but all with a renewed sense of accountability. Willowbrook, once threatened, had become a symbol, not just for Hampshire, but for anyone who believed in standing up for what mattered. Charlotte poured her energy into building a new future for Willowbrook. With the royalties from her book and the support of animal welfare groups, she founded the Willowbrook Wild Heart Trust, a foundation dedicated to rescuing, rehabilitating, and protecting wild and abandoned animals across the region. The estate's old barns were converted into a modern education center, where local children came for field trips, volunteers learned wildlife first aid, and naturalists gave talks about the delicate balance between people, land, and animals. Word spread far beyond Hampshire. Journalists from across Europe visited, filming documentaries about the woman who'd defied money and power for a pair of wild ponies. The BBC returned to shoot a special about the estate's transformation. Families visited from London and beyond, walking the trails that wound through meadows and ancient oaks, hoping for a glimpse of wild ponies grazing at the forest's edge. Charlotte was at the heart of it all, but never in the way she had once imagined. She wore old jeans and sun hats, spent her mornings mucking out stalls and her afternoons teaching children to listen for the songbirds or find deer tracks in the mud. She no longer felt out of place, no longer worried about society's expectations. The old doubts about her worth, her courage, her future had been swept away by a year of trial, loss, and love. On the anniversary of Tempest and Storm's escape, Willowbrook hosted its first Wild Heart Festival. The village green was filled with music and laughter. Stalls sold honey, cheese, and preserves. Children painted faces and made stick pony races across the field. In the main tent, Charlotte gave a quiet speech, thanking the community for their faith and courage. She ended with the words that had become her compass. We can't always choose what life brings us, but we can always choose how we answer. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let go and trust that love will carry on, wherever it must go next. After the crowd drifted away and dusk settled over the estate, Charlotte took a walk alone to the highest hill. She carried a small bundle, a child's drawing, a faded horseshoe, and a letter from a mother who'd adopted a rescue pony after reading Charlotte's book. At the top, she found a quiet spot beneath an ancient oak and sat down, feeling the soft earth beneath her palms. She read the letter aloud to the evening sky, voice steady, a thank you for teaching us that love isn't just about holding on, but about letting wild hearts find their own way home. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves. Charlotte closed her eyes, picturing Tempest and Storm somewhere in the deep green of New Forest, strong and free. She could see Storm, taller now, running in wide circles while Tempest watched nearby, fierce and proud. Sometimes she dreamed of them at night, never behind a fence, always galloping through shafts of light, manes flying, untouchable and joyful. As she sat, she thought about the true meaning of legacy. It was not the stones of Willowbrook or the family crest on the old silver. It wasn't even the headlines or the foundation, though those things mattered. True legacy, she realized, was the impact of kindness, the choices made in moments of fear and hope, the courage to act not for recognition, but because it was right. A child's voice echoed from the lane below, breaking her reverie. "Lady Charlotte, did you ever see Tempest again?" She turned and smiled, waving. "Not yet, but I know they're out there. And they're happy, I think." She watched as the sun slipped toward the trees, painting the sky in watercolor pinks and blues. In her lap, the child's drawing fluttered in the breeze, a picture of a gray mare and her foal beneath a golden sun, wild and free. As the last light faded, Charlotte whispered to the wind, "Thank you for choosing freedom. Thank you for teaching me how to let go." She rose and made her way back down the hill, each step lighter than the last. There was still work to do, animals to care for, lessons to teach, land to protect. There always would be. But Charlotte understood now that her own wild heart, like tempests and storms, belonged not to the past, but to all the tomorrows she could help create. And so Willowbrook's legacy lived on, not in grand monuments, but in the quiet, daily acts of courage, compassion, and the belief that true nobility is found not in inheritance, but in how we answer the wild call of love.